How's it going, y'all? Welcome back to this Advanced Climber series. In today's video, we'll be going over a mix of skill and strength training. I'll go ahead and kick us off with number 61, understanding the practical advantages and disadvantages of different techniques. If you're a child prodigy, don't bother listening to this. It's not really for you. You won't need it. However, for anyone who got into climbing a little later in life than 4, it's important to develop something of an analytical take on your climbing movement. And the reason I'm making this separation out from people who started very young versus people who didn't is because the amount of intuition we can develop shifts over time. I've met many great climbers who started in the single digits of age who don't have the most analytical approach to how they move, but their intuition is incredible. Their body and their mind are so synced when they are on rock. It's unbelievable. It's incredible to watch that level of intuitive understanding. And it's not to say that they don't know what they're doing. They definitely do. They do have some analytical approach. However, the people I see who really succeed in climbing, who start later in life, are the ones who can develop intuition along the way, but they also develop a very analytical approach to their movement. They can stop and say, okay, this move, what can I try? I can try a drop knee. What are all the ups and downs of drop knees? A drop knee is not going to let me straighten my legs out as high as maybe climbing square would, but it might feel more secure. I'm going to be able to push sideways into the holds better. It's not going to let me claw down into the holds as much. Being able to go through and have sort of a checklist of saying, here the good, here the bad, where does that make that technique fall on this list is very helpful. An incredibly valid skill in climbing is being able to listen to the feedback that a climb is giving you. Anytime you're on the wall, your body has a lot of sensations. There are things that are happening. Does it feel like you're out of balance? Does it feel like you're holding a lot of tension in your midsection in your legs but not your arms? Whenever you fall, what direction did you go? We are constantly bombarded with all of this feedback from climbs. Being able to feel that just intuitively, being able to learn how to understand what those sensations mean is very useful. But we can't only rely on how things feel and automatically adjusting based on that. We need to be able to use some logic and reason to approach problem solving as well. A good way of developing this is trying to talk through what are all the advantages and disadvantages of different techniques and skills. And pick ones that maybe feel obvious, like momentum. What are all the upsides and downsides of momentum? Because we often think, oh, there's some great upsides, but there's a couple that most people really miss out on. And what are the downsides? You could say, well, it's rushed and it's out of control, but not always. And there are other things as well that are downsides of momentum. Same thing with locking off, climbing square, twisting. There are ups and downs to every single skill out there that I'm aware of. The better that you can logically talk through these things, the better you will be at applying these skills to the wall. Here's a little bonus tip for this. Processing these things out loud gives you a little extra special something. Some people are verbal processors. Just by saying things out loud, that helps them work through problem solving a lot better. Works in the regular life, it'll work here too. But another really cool thing happens. If you encounter a problem, there's this crux move, you're not sure how to do it, and you start trying to explain it out loud. It doesn't have to be to anyone. You could be explaining to the wall itself. Just explaining the whole situation. What that does is it switches our mindsets. We go from being stuck in our head and this little internal turmoil of analysis of trying to figure out how do I do this thing, and we switch over to a teaching mindset. And when you're teaching, we are considering things in different ways. You're more likely to describe the problem entirely as it is. If I'm explaining to someone or a boulder in front of me, I'm going to more thoroughly detail all the points of the problem. I'm more likely to see gaps in my logic, and this just gives me a new perspective instead of being so tunnel visioned on something in one specific way. By taking a step back and trying to explain it out loud, and elaborate on the nuance, you might actually stumble across some good ideas that come out of your mouth. We can't go back in time and start climbing over as a younger person to develop all this natural intuition back when our brains were just complete sponges. But you can develop a more analytical approach to your climbing. And if these tips have been helping you out, I'd love if you help me out by hitting subscribe down below. Number 62, consider adding strength training to your routine. If you're not already training, now's a good time to start doing it. And when I talk about strength training, right now I'm specifically talking about general strength training. Specific strength training would be like finger strength and specific pulling strength to rock climbing. So what I'm discussing right now is more broadly general strength and conditioning, or general physical preparedness is another phrase you could use. The best advice I can give you here is learn what the fundamentals of strength training are, and then pick whatever system feels like you can stick with it the easiest. We want to make sure we are consistent. We're doing enough volume. We are trying moderately hard with our lifting. We are progressing the difficulty across time, and we're getting sufficient rest and recovery. If you can check those boxes, the system you use, the implements you use for strength training aren't going to matter that much. If you want to do calisthenics, amazing, do it. That's a fun way to get into strength training. That also gets you moving your body more and gets you more in touch with movement through space. That's fun. That's a great time. If you're really low tech and at your home you have gymnastics rings and a few kettlebells, fun. That's actually one of my favorite pairings for strength training. That's a really great time, and you can get as strong as you need from that. If barbells appeal to you, amazing. There's a tremendous amount of information out there about how to train with barbells using both conventional and non-conventional lifts. You're going to have a great time. Now you might be thinking, okay, Nate, that's cool. We've gotten past the preamble. Let's get to the good part. What is the actual best way to train for general strength for climbing? Look, and here's the thing. There doesn't need to be one. There isn't one. It truly is, what are you going to show up and do? And this is for two main reasons. One, doing the fundamentals consistently for years, regardless of the training implements you use, is going to get you strong enough. If you look at the amount of general strength required to climb V10 and 514, we're advanced climbers in this category, so those are going to be the buckets that I'm choosing. If we're looking at V10 and 514, the amount of general strength that's needed, not specific strength, to be able to climb those grades just isn't that much when compared to what humans are physically capable of. Yes, if you wanted to get the strongest bench press humanly possible for yourself, you would be able to get so much stronger if you picked a very specific, periodized, hyper-focused bench pressing plan. Is that really going to help you climb harder? Maybe, sure. But is it worth the energy you're going to put in and the resources that you're going to put into that and the recovery you're going to need? No, probably not. A really classic example of this that I love is several years ago, there were a couple of sports news websites that were sharing a story about how Steph Curry, I think he hit a new deadlift PR of like 415 pounds for everyone not American. Something like that. I was like, oh, this is cool. And that made him have the second highest deadlift on his team. And he's kind of a smaller guy by NBA standards. What followed afterwards to me was comical. There was a very famous strength and conditioning coach who his lane is getting people into lifting and more into general barbell work, kind of powerlifting. And he went off. He said that Steph Curry was an embarrassment to athletes, to men. He was an embarrassment to his own family. I wish I was joking here, but this all happened. And he just went off. He was like, what a disgrace that NBA strength and conditioning is, that this is seen as something impressive. 415 deadlift. Absurd. This is childlike weight. Of course, this made it to powerlifting forums, and bros are talking about how, You should be able to deadlift that after just a few years of powerlifting. How is this guy's a pro athlete making millions of dollars? And they all miss the point. No one cares how heavy Steph Curry can deadlift. Comically, he had never deadlifted before in his life until college. He got an ankle injury, and a PT was like, oh yeah, you should start doing this. And they realized he had never done it, and they actually had to teach him how to deadlift then in college. Deadlifting just doesn't really matter if you're a basketball player. There are 100 other things far more important. Climbing's not that much different. The amount of general strength that we need to climb well isn't that extreme. So when I say stick to the fundamentals, be consistent, keep showing up, trying hard, progressing over time, prioritize recovery, do all of these things, and then don't stress so much about what training implement, whether it's barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, calisthenics, whatever. It's not because I'm trying to hide secrets from you. If someone tells you you have to use one implement or one implement is the only way, they're probably selling something. If someone says this is the way, anything else is subpar, whether that's barbells, isometrics, calisthenics, kettlebells, they likely have some incentive to do so. Number 63, understand that training and performance aren't always going to be fun. Hard things are hard. I wish they weren't. It'd be a lot easier to have massive breakthroughs and send the most challenging things of your life and really grind and put in the best training possible if it felt easy. And if it felt easy, everyone would do it. But that's just not the case. When it comes to performance, it's good to understand that you're going to experience nerves. That's fine. That is your brain and body preparing you to do something. Nerves are just going to happen, and they're not always fun. People will often say, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. I don't believe that's the case, though. To do something that's really challenging for you may not feel fun in that exact moment. Even think about things that are classically seen as fun. You can think of solving puzzles or crosswords or even video games. A lot of them are very frustrating at times. It's not just pure roller coaster fun time the whole way. I say that because I like roller coasters. Maybe roller coasters aren't fun for you. Another example. We are capable of thriving in self-chosen challenges. And this is something I wish I would have known earlier. There is such a big difference between a challenge that is dropped on you to where you don't feel like this was a choice. Let's say check engine light comes on your car and you have 100 other things you need to get done this week. That's not a challenge that you choose to deal with. That's not fun. But just because this challenge isn't enjoyable doesn't mean that a self-imposed challenge of, I want to go climb this boulder, it's going to demand a lot of me. I'm going to need to really focus, really dial in a lot of things. It's going to be frustrating at times. It's going to feel impossible to me for quite a bit. And I'm going to have to deal with a lot physically, mentally, technically, tactically. I might have to swap around my life's schedule for a few weeks to be able to get this done. In the grand scheme of this challenge that might take you a few weeks, there are going to be a lot of moments that aren't just fun. But that's okay. Because if you take joy in this routine of pushing yourself and challenging yourself and trying to grow, if at the end you say, wow, that was great. I enjoyed this challenge. I enjoyed seeing what I was capable of. Amazing. It's worth those little speed bumps along the way. So just because something isn't fun right now, this very second, doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It might actually mean you're doing things right. When it comes to training, we're no longer seeing day after day progress at this point in climbing. This often leads people to shift their training towards things that can be measured more accurately, and so they have metrics to chase. They can say, well, this number went up week after week, therefore it's good. So much of climbing, unfortunately, is not that easily measurable. Chasing new methodologies only because they are more measurable is a fool's errand. You will find yourself in a dead end with all the measurables you want, but without changes to your performance. So much of climbing is hard to measure. There are so many intangibles that go into this sport. If your motivation is purely based on seeing numbers go up, that's going to really cloud your decision-making process for how you prepare for this sport. Another way to go about this is to embrace what is called a blue-collar mindset. The goal isn't big jumps and increases in wins every day. The goal is show up, put in quality work that you can be proud of, day after day, week after week, year after year. This is what great athletes do. They're not trying to get new victories every single day. They are putting in the work knowing that down the road, that's when the difference is going to be really made. Number 64, learning how to use all of your limbs together as one team. Early on in climbing, people are constantly shouted at, use your feet, use your feet, use your feet. It's the most general advice, though it is funny the idea of use your feet. It doesn't actually tell you what to do. I always thought that was kind of funny when people's feet would cut and people would just yell, use your feet. What does that mean? If we're going to shout at strangers, let's at least think through what we're going to say first. Once you've learned how to use your legs a little bit more in climbing, a lot of people actually have to learn how to use their arms as well. So instead of keeping straight and loose arms and just pushing with my legs, I now need to learn how to grab and pull with my arms really well. Beyond that, we need to learn how can I coordinate the two together? Can I use them as a team rather than legs push, arms pull as these two separate units? Can we put it in all-wheel drive? I want my entire body to move together as one cohesive unit. As you become more advanced, moves become more awkward. You might have to push with one foot, pull with another, Gaston press with one arm, and undercling with your other arm. We're doing all these different things at the same time, and you may be convinced, oh, well, yeah, I do that all the time. That's totally fine. However, just because you are climbing with all four limbs doesn't mean you're using them to their maximum ability. A good way to check in with yourself to see, am I doing this well, is anytime you fall off of a hard move, pause and think, what are all four limbs doing? Where were they? How much force was I putting through all four limbs? Can you tell me, just first off, what were my legs doing? If you can say, well, my right leg was on this toeing in, I have no clue what my left leg was doing. I don't know where it was, if it was on a hold, if it was pushing. Cool. That's great. May not sound great, but that's really good. That means we have something new to work on. We need to get both legs involved better. Typically, whenever you fall, I love the question of what happened. And so we can kind of weave this thread in there of what were all four of my limbs doing? What were they doing? Where were they? How much force was I putting through them? If you can even get used to asking yourself those questions, it will help you with problem solving, with power generation, with body tension, so many different things. Number 65, learn how to read different rock types. Even if you only climb at one area, I think this is still a very valuable skill because understanding how limestone climbs basalt, tuft, sandstone, granite, schist, gneiss, all these different things, the more you can learn how different rock types present, the more you can just understand how rock forms in general. That will give you a new level of literacy when problem solving. There are three main things that I like to do when trying to understand a new rock type. The first thing is walk around and touch as much rock as you can. If you're in a boulder field, man, on rest days, I will go through and I'll hike and I'll look at things, I'll touch holds. If I'm at a sport climbing crag, I'm going to walk along the base and I'm going to touch holds. I'm going to look and see, how does the rock form? How does it break? How does it polish? How does it hold chalk? How does it hold shoe rubber? I want to get as familiar with these shapes as possible so that as I'm climbing, I kind of know what to look for. As a boulderer, it's still very useful to get good at all different rock types, but as a sport climber, it is crucial. You don't have the time to go up and touch every inch of every wall on every route that you go up. It's not possible. You need to be able to look and say, okay, I can't see around that arête, but I think there's going to be a crimp over there. Just by the way that this rock breaks, by the way this rock forms, from everything else I have seen so far, this makes me think I should reach blindly around this corner. The more you can develop this literacy for rock types and understanding how they form, honestly, the more fun outdoor climbing is and the better your performance is going to be. There are so many things you will likely miss if you don't take the time to understand all the details of different rock types. So that's number 1. Go for a walk, touch rock. Number 2, climb the area classics. For sport climbing, this is especially true because you want to know, what does a rock feel like when it's polished? How does shoe rubber show up? How does chalk show up? What are some of the dominant features of this area? And often if you're climbing classics, they're going to be good representations of the style. So I'm a fan. Man, I go and I climb the most polished, over-trafficked classics that I can anytime I go to a new area, because that's probably going to teach me something great. I'm going to learn so much more based on that rather than going to some obscure climb that is unique to the area entirely. The final thing, and this is the classical way of learning about new rock types, is watch the locals. This one is so underrated. If you watch someone who climbs in an area all the time, who knows all the trickery, all the ways of using the features, the hands, the feet, the rests, that's going to show you so much of how this rock can be interacted with. Find someone who's great at what they're doing in that area, at that style. Watch them, study them. What are they doing differently than you? What do they do differently than everyone? What is it that they're doing that might seem counterintuitive to how you would have approached this? It's a very common piece of advice for people who want to get better at climbing, to climb on as many different rock types as possible. And while I think it's a very privileged piece of advice, because, it takes money to travel for most of us, that aside, I do think this is great advice. If you're going to get the most out of going to these different areas and climbing on these different rock types, I think you should do your best to go there as a student of the game. How much can you learn from this area, from this rock type? If you want to go to a new area that you've never been to with unique rock type and spend a full 3-week trip on only one rock climb that you might send and it's a high number, cool, do it. But if your goal is to improve year after year and become a more robust, well-rounded climber, climb everything. Do all these things I just listed. Really try to learn that rock and get as much value and education out of that you can. Number 66. If you're already training, don't try and reinvent the wheel. Look, this one's pointed at me just as much as anyone else. I had mentioned earlier how when you've been training for a long time, things can get kind of boring. At this point, there's a lot of drudgery in good quality training. Because of that, we often kind of want to spice things up. We'll make changes a lot of times and we'll try and adapt new hypothetical systems for how to train. And here's the thing, if you're a hobbyist sports scientist and that's what you want to do is try and run these little micro experiments on yourself and test things out, have fun with it. That can be a great time. However, if your goal is climbing performance, it is my belief that constantly changing variables and using untested methods to try and get stronger and fitter and more prepared for climbing is not a good way to go. I often see people doing this because they're not seeing massive jumps in progress anymore, and they want to get back to that. So they keep trying to change things up and say, okay, well, here's this squat program that these people do. If I change out squats for hangs, then I'll do this. Or here's these new types of thing. Here's a new tool that I can use that, people have just started using. If someone just started using it, it's not tested. If you're Yves Gravel, first off, hi Yves. If you're one of the world's strongest grip champions and you've been training diligently at your finger strength for decades, yeah, if you want to do something a little experimental to change things up, that's okay. But for the rest of us, if you've been climbing under 10 years, I highly doubt you have started to scratch the surface of effective training. There is so much more juice to squeeze out of great methods. And here's the thing, I'm not against new novel things. I love them. I own every grip training toy that exists. I would love to just do fun, silly, experimental training all the time. But I want results. That's what I want. It's fun to goof around with new novel things, but I'm looking for results that come month after month, year after year. Not something that gives me a little 4 to 6 week boost, and then I have to go find the new fun toy and way of training. Advanced climbers, more than any other category, really struggle with this. It's so tempting to want to play the training lottery and trade out good, safe progress that's going to be slow and consistent for, what if I find this magic thing though, this magic bullet? What if that could revolutionize my climbing? Let's say you are a training savant and 1 in every 10 things you do is incredible. If you're changing things constantly, it's going to be very hard to actually figure out which variable made that big difference. Like, do you have to, if you just keep adding new things and you have 30 new things you've tried this year and something worked, do you have to do those 30 things again every single time? How do you iterate on that? How do you progress from 30 different things? How do you progress when you're changing your workouts every other week? We need consistency. We need simplicity. I mentioned it 2 points ago, but good training can feel like drudgery. Learn to embrace it. Learn to have that blue-collar mindset. We don't need the flashy, shiny new things every other week. Punch the clock. Show up. Do work that you can be proud of. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining me for another episode. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them down below, and I'll see y'all next time.